Climbers must take extra precautions when using a chainsaw aloft in a tree. Only experienced climbers with proper chainsaw training should ever use a chainsaw in a tree. The climber must use a second means of securing themselves in the tree, such as a safety lanyard, before making a chainsaw cut. Stable footing and work positioning is important to maintain control. All chainsaw safety procedures apply, including the two-hand rule and avoiding making cuts above shoulder level. Chainsaws weighing more than 15 pounds must be supported by a separate line unless no supporting limb is available. Work positioning is an important safety consideration when using a chainsaw in a tree. Climbers must be sure they are in a safe, stable position before cutting, usually above or to the side of the limb being cut. This means avoiding being in a position that could cause the climber to be injured in the follow-through from the cut or if the saw kicks back. Climbers must also be aware of the position of the climbing line, safety lanyard, and all other ropes to avoid accidental cutting. Finally, it is important to avoid being in a position of being struck by the limb that is cut. Before beginning any removal, if the structure of the tree, the chainsaw operator must be aware of the presence and activity of other workers in the vicinity. Never approach a chainsaw operator from the rear. If two workers are operating saws simultaneously, they should be at least 10 feet apart. Many times, in the situations under which arborists work, trees must be rigged for removal. Other times, they can be felled using a tag line, pull line, for added control. Workers who are not directly involved in the removal operation should be 2 tree lengths away from the tree being felled. Those involved, including those on the tag line, must be at least 1 tree length away, have an established means of communication with the feller, and have a planned escape route. The preferred escape route for the chainsaw operator in a felling operation is 45 degrees on either side of a line drawn opposite the intended direction of fall. As soon as the tree starts to fall, the feller should move away in this direction, but should not turn his back to the tree. Felling notches and back cuts must be made high enough above ground level to enable the chainsaw operator to begin the cut safely, control the saw, and have freedom of movement for escape. A number of notch configurations can be used for felling trees, including an open face notch, a conventional notch, and a Humboldt notch. Commonly, a 45-degree notch is used. However, an open-face notch of 70 degrees or more allows the hinge to control the tree longer. A rule of thumb for the depth of the notch is 1/3 or less of the diameter of the tree. The length of the hinge should be about 80% of the tree's diameter. If possible, the notch should not be placed in the vicinity of cracks or decay because it is important to have solid fiber to form the hinge. It is very easy to bypass the apex of the notch when making the cuts. Bypassing cuts sever the crucial fibers of the hinge and must be avoided. The hinge is critical in controlling the direction of fall. If the hinge is the proper thickness, then the wood fibers should break when the face notch closes. The rule of thumb for felling trees is to allow a hinge with a thickness of 10% of the tree's diameter. Flexibility in this guideline is in order. For example, when cutting short sections, a 10% hinge may be too much for the climber to break off with limited leverage. For larger trees, a hinge of less than 10% may be better. Avoid cutting into the hinge when making the back cut. The traditional straight back cut is made from the back of the tree toward the notch. The hinge is formed as the back cut approaches the notch. It is easy to cut through the hinge while making the back cut, especially if the saw operator is looking toward the top of the tree. Most texts recommend making the back cut slightly higher than the apex of the notch to reduce the possibility of the tree kicking back toward the operator when the hinge breaks. This is important when using a conventional 45-degree notch. Most instructors now teach the open face notch, which allows the hinge to control the fall of the tree longer than with the conventional 45-degree notch. With the open face notch, the back cut does not need to be stepped higher. It can be cut at the same level as the apex of the notch. Sometimes, if the tree is leaning in the direction of fall or has internal faults, the tree can split upward from the back cut. This is called a barber chair, and it can be very dangerous. The split trunk can hit the person felling the tree, which is often fatal. Specific training in cutting techniques for felling trees with lean or with flaws can reduce the possibility of a barber chair occurring. Also, a load strap or logging chain could be secured around the tree above the notch to reduce or prevent splitting. No other workers should be in the area directly behind the tree. The worker making the back cut should plan an escape route at a 45-degree angle to either side of a line drawn opposite the intended direction of fall. It is a good idea to have felling wedges ready when making the back cut. Wedges can be driven into the back cut to prevent the tree from closing on the back cut and pinching the bar of the chainsaw and to help initiate the fall. Brush chippers can be very dangerous machines. Proper training and safe work practices are essential when operating them. Training should include instruction on daily inspection and maintenance, towing procedures, starting the chipper, feeding brush, and the potential safety hazards involved with operation. All instructional and warning stickers and labels on the chipper must be in place and legible. Proper PPE is required, and loose clothing, jewelry, climbing saddles, harnesses or body belts, and gauntlet-type gloves must not be worn while operating chippers because they could be caught on brush and could pull the operator into the chipper.
Brush should be fed from the side, and the worker feeding the brush should move away after the brush is fed. The larger butt end of each branch should be fed in first. Smaller limbs should be pushed into the chipper with larger limbs. No part of the operator's body should ever reach beyond the back edge of the in-feed chute. The operator should be careful to avoid placing foreign material, such as rocks, wires, or other debris, into the chipper, because such material could damage the knives or cause projectiles to be thrown from the machine.
The larger butt end of each branch should be fed in first. Smaller limbs should be pushed into the chipper with larger limbs. No part of the operator's body should ever reach beyond the back edge of the in-feed chute. The operator should be careful to avoid placing foreign material such as rocks, wires, or other debris into the chipper because such material could damage the knives or cause projectiles to be thrown from the machine. Many accidents have occurred when workers attempted to perform maintenance while the chipper disc or drum was still moving. No person should ever work on a chipper unless the engine is turned off, the ignition key removed, and the cutter wheel completely stopped, with lock pin in place if applicable, and prevented from moving. Working in and around trees can be very hazardous. A commitment to safety at all levels is important, along with developing a program to prevent accidents and recognize potential hazards. Safety laws and regulations were established for workers engaged in pruning, repairing, maintaining, or removing trees or cutting brush. Personal protective equipment, PPE, is required to be worn by all tree workers. Your region may require head protection, hard hats or approved helmets, hearing protection, eye protection, gloves, leg protection, special boots, appropriate clothing. Good communication among workers is an integral part of working safely. This includes coordinating operations on the ground and aloft in the trees, awareness of what other workers are doing in the area, using a voice command and response system or hand signals to ensure that warning signals are understood, acknowledged, and acted upon. General safety at the worksite begins with proper training, including awareness of all applicable safety regulations, proper use of all equipment with safe working practices, first aid and CPR. First aid kit must be on each truck. Emergency response and aerial rescue procedures. Identification of poison ivy, poison oak, and poison sumac. Securing the work zone so individuals don't pass under trees.
Baba. Mira. I don't know. طيب. ما الكرون.
Safe chainsaw practices must be used to avoid serious injury as well as tree damage. Always use both hands when operating a chainsaw on the ground or aloft. Release the throttle and engage the chain brake before moving between cuts. To avoid kickback, don't let the tip of the guide bar come in contact with objects. Only experienced climbers with proper training should use a chainsaw in a tree. Tree felling and removal begins by first planning a safety strategy for the job. Unless directly involved, stay 2 tree lengths away from the tree being felled. Establish communication with the feller and have a planned escape route. Preferred escape route for chainsaw operator is 45 degrees on either side of a line opposite the intended direction of fall. A 45-degree notch is commonly used to fell trees. 70 degrees or more allows the hinge to control the tree longer. Notch depth should be 1/3 or less of a tree diameter. Hinge length should be about 80% of tree diameter. Avoid cracks and decayed areas. It is important to have solid fiber to form the hinge. Avoid cutting into the hinge when making the back cut. Chipper safety involves proper training and safe work practices. Training should include instruction on daily inspection and maintenance, towing procedures, starting the chipper, feeding brush, identifying potential safety hazards of the job site. Safe work practices include proper PPE, loose clothing, jewelry, climbing saddles, harnesses or body belts, and gauntlet-type gloves must not be worn while operating chippers because they can catch on brush and pull the operator into the chipper. All instructional and warning stickers or labels must be in place and legible on the chipper. Workers should feed brush from the side and move away as the brush is fed. The larger butt end of each branch should be fed first. Smaller limbs should be pushed into the chipper using larger limbs. Do not service chipper unless engine is off, ignition key removed, and cutter wheel completely stopped with lock pin in place if applicable and prevented from moving.